Today, we are very privileged to welcome Dan Christensen to the TIC podcast. Dan, welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, for a brief introduction to everyone, so Dan's an executive leader in the TIC sector and is currently the director of Industrial Hygiene lab sales services, in North America for Bureau Veritas. Dan has extensive experience in the industrial hygiene sector, working across all four corners of the globe. And Dan is actually also a podcast host himself. So, first time I've had to, I suppose, not compete, but we can work alongside each other. More experience than myself.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
That's not true. Dan, absolute pleasure having you on. I said the wealth of experience that you have in this space is awesome. I'm keen to sort of hear a lot of your thoughts and maybe even to kick things off, as a leader in the industrial hygiene space, not only North America, but globally. Can you give us all maybe a quick overview on how you started in the sector or even found yourself in this industry?
It's really interesting that you asked that question because every time I think about it, I come up with a different kind of, there was that perspective as well. I was a late college student. I really was trying to try everything that I could to make my way in the world. And one of the commonalities that kept coming up was workplace sort of environments. I worked in dusty environments, loud environments, welding, construction, and they all had their own inherent hazards. And I encountered this field in college, and I was like, wow, there's a degree that manages workplace hazards, and it was really like water off a duck's back. And I happened to be at a university that had a bachelor's level program, and I took to it, and it was a great move. Didn't even know what industrial hygiene was. It's such an oddly termed, sometimes called occupational hygiene, sometimes called exposure science. But there's a real great need out there in really every industry that has some sort of risk associated with it. And so I happened to do an internship at a copper mine in Arizona while I was still in university, and that kind of pointed me towards heavy industry because that's where my experience was. And I started off in coal mining in New Mexico with, oddly enough, an Australian company. And that little piece of luck happened to open up my world to travel. I was no longer kind of a U.S.-based perspective. All of a sudden, I was being introduced to not only U.S. regulations, but international regulations and different standards and different ways of working, and then having opportunities to go and do like auditing in different countries. So right off the bat, being an industrial hygienist straight out of university, I was presented with some amazing opportunities to travel and practice the craft in lots of different industries.
Yeah, certainly. I think industrial hygiene is great because, as you said, it's not localized to, let's say, North America, Europe. It's everywhere. It exists. It exists in every walk of life. So, you've been privileged to work in different locations, continents. I said all four corners of the globe, which probably isn't far wrong. But with that, I suppose, there is, I imagine, difficulties you face in terms of adjusting to, cultural or procedural differences between certain locations. So, I suppose, what were the main things that you encountered? If it's, I suppose, finding specific labs close to yourself, if it's difficulty with, shipping, what did you encounter?
Yeah, resources can be a challenge, right? But also the practice of industrial hygiene is a challenge. You have to figure out how to, for example, in a Western country, trucking would be pretty standardized. So if you're working in an oil and gas field and you have trucks that come on site, they're going to have standardized fittings, standardized openings, general standardized practices and procedures driven by regulation. You get into the developing world, and every truck that comes on site is different opening sizes, different levels of understanding, different levels of education amongst the workforce, different levels of expectation, no regulations driving things. And so then you have to learn how to adapt in that. And then you bring up a good point. As industrial hygienists, we take a lot of samples of usually air, but also surface samples or different kinds of ways of assessing what the risk might be. And a lot of times a laboratory is involved.
Yeah.
excuse me. And where a laboratory is involved in analyzing those samples, you want to use an accredited laboratory, and making sure that it's operating to the right standards, whether it's an ISO standard or whether it's an industry standard like a NIOSH test or an OSHA test. And that can be difficult to find outside of developing world. So then you're left with, well, I'm in the Middle East, and is there where is my closest accredited lab? And you find that you're having an added shipping cost to get to, well, my closest accredited lab is a UKAS lab based out of the UK. And so now I'm shipping from the Middle East to the UK, whereas someone who's doing the same work in Western Europe is shipping to the UK, and it's much less cost on that company because it's not as far of a distance. And so then you have an added cost in a developing country that doesn't have the level of resources that, say, a Western or developed country has. And that presents challenges as far as how we can do our work. And so you have to find ways to make it work for that environment in the best way possible. Get the best information for the level of effort that you can really oftentimes afford to do. So that's a challenge. And then there's cultural challenges. People have, for example, a lot of Western countries will have practices like clean shaven. If you're going to wear some sort of tight-fitting respirator, you need to be clean shaven. There's not that many prohibitions. There are religious prohibitions in Western countries, but that is a very difficult thing in, say, like a Middle Eastern country where wearing a beard is very much a religious experience, or maybe it's a head covering of some kind that interferes with what you would traditionally use for personal protective equipment. And so then you have to find, well, are there other options besides a tight-fitting respirator that requires a clean shaven? And then you find that there are powered air purifying hoods that people could wear that have air being supplied over, and it prevents contaminated air from coming inside, so it's pushing clean air out of the mask. And then people that wear have a prohibition against cutting a beard or having a clean shaven can then utilize that different PPE, personal protective equipment. So that's just sort of the you have one way of doing it in one location, and you may do it differently somewhere else, and that's okay as long as the end outcome is the same.
Sure. Those are probably points that we maybe it's through naivety, but maybe we take for granted in the Western world, actually having to overcome, as you said, if it's people's cultural norms, and as you said, the way that for religious reasons they wear their beard or head coverings, etc. We probably wouldn't even think about those as, I don't necessarily say an obstacle, but in terms of PPE, as something you actually have to overcome. So it's actually quite interesting you mentioned that. I wouldn't have thought. And then to go back, I suppose, to the topic of lab accessibility. One cost. I know shipping is a lot nicer now with Amazon, etc. But surely that affects turnaround time. And if you're looking at being as efficient as you can for clients, etc., that'd be a massive hindrance, wouldn't it? So I mean, is there? This is a very loaded question. I'm wary of it, Dan. But I mean, do you think that's anything that we can do as an industry to resolve those issues and actually allow for maybe more effective turnaround time, regardless of location, even if it's in more remote or, as I said, the developing world, I'll say.
Yeah, well, there's like you say, it's a loaded question, so there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Let me look at it in a couple of different ways. So and I'll speak to our competitors at Bureau Veritas. We have two laboratories in the United States that are pretty well centrally located in Illinois and Michigan. And when I send my sales team out and they talk to people, say on the West Coast or the East Coast, they'll ask, well, where are your labs located? And so I've encouraged them to not say, well, we're located, in Michigan or Illinois. I say we're located wherever your closest UPS or FedEx drop-off is, right? Because as you mentioned, the Amazon 2-day shipping expectation for the world has really shrunk the world in getting things to locations quickly. Not everywhere, but a lot of places. So somewhere like domestic U.S., North America, Canada, Mexico, things can be shipped pretty quickly across the board. Many of them are available overnight. from pretty much anywhere in North America, which is an amazing technical capability. That doesn't exist in places like Africa or in places like Southeast Asia. There is shipping challenges, and some kinds of industrial hygiene samples are very stable. Dust on a cassette doesn't matter how long it takes to get there, doesn't affect the outcome of the test. But some things have to be shipped cold, and so now shipping does become an issue. And so there are challenges there. And I know some of our competitors will have multiple locations, and that presents its own challenges. If you've got, say, 6 or 7 labs or 10 labs across a particular geographical region, you've got to look at how do you decide what services you offer at what lab and at what location. So it's a lot more logistics going on there. But that being said, even being centrally located in the United States, we do a fair amount of international work. And that does speak to the lack of accredited labs outside of North America, Western Europe.
Yeah.
So there's opportunity there to grow for sure. And we know where the giant population centers of India and China are. And as an industrial hygienist, I know that of those who become certified every year, about half are in India and China. So there is a shift from a lot of industrial hygiene practice happening in the Western world, and it is shifting to the East. And so I think that there is opportunity there to build up labs in those locations. And look, labs are businesses, right?
Yeah.
You've got to have a profit center. You've got to be able to say, is there enough business in this area to support opening a laboratory and all of the expenses that go along with that. And so that's something I imagine our competitors and we're always looking at opportunities. Where or what are the parameters for us to move into a South American market with a physical location, or can we continue to serve the world as the world shrinks with advanced shipping capabilities? And so that's always on the table. We're always looking for those opportunities, and I'm very happy to see the growth across the world. Sometimes it's a financial thing the other way too. Like I bought an audiometric booth for testing hearing in Canada. Cost $10,000, so I have a budget for $10,000. Shipping it to Pakistan cost $10,000, so now it's $20,000. Pakistan had a 100% import tariff.
Wow.
So I got to pay another $10,000 to get it in the country. So a $10,000 audiometric booth cost $30,000 at the end of the day to get it shipped to the location in Pakistan. And so sometimes that kind of thing can happen. And if you're aware of it ahead of time, you can budget for it. But how much easier would it be and I know we're I'm the last person being an American to talk about tariffs, to be in a nice place where we can, sell each other stuff without extra tariffs. But, that's the world we live in. And so the more experience we have with those things, the more we can prepare for them. And again, I'm very happy to see the growth happening in these other regions. And I'm always excited when we get a new opportunity with a company out of India or a company out of China, a company out of Indonesia. I love to see that they're taking care of their workers from an industrial hygiene perspective.
No, of course. I think, global work, there's always going to be that opportunity, as you've said, for growth, for, new labs to be created. And as you said, it's exciting seeing developing countries, really taking pride. So is it 50% of new certified industrial hygienists are was it India or just sort of that wider area of Asia, maybe into the Middle East?
Wider area of Asia. I say India and China just because those are the two biggest population centers, but it's really sort of that, east of the Middle East, subcontinent, Australia, the Oceania. I'm not exactly sure what the correct terminology is, but yeah, that's where we're seeing the shift of certified industrial hygienists going. So where in the past you would have 200 or so certified industrial hygienists taking and passing the test, and most of them would be either Western European or North America.
Yeah.
The shift is now moving to South America, Southeast Asia, Middle East, China.
Sure. Well, I think it's great for the industry, as I said, to see that growth outside of the Western world and North America. Just to go back onto, I suppose, what you were talking about, logistical issues, etc. Maybe it's a contentious topic, but in North America right now, we see a lot about maybe strategic decisions on that sort of acquisition and to expand into further labs, or to grow, I suppose, existing infrastructure models. So like yourself with Chicago and Michigan, really maximizing what you can out of those labs before, going to looking at acquiring further labs and maybe expanding your geographic coverage. I mean, as a sales leader, what's your take on that topic, I guess? Expansion through acquisition versus, expanding what you've currently got and really, as I said, squeezing all the juice.
So, it's funny you mentioned that. Early in my career, I mentioned I was a late college student. One of the things that I did was I worked in manufacturing, and we made exercise equipment, treadmills, in fact, that you run on.
Yeah.
And it was an assembly line, right? You start with a bare metal frame and then add parts. And by the time it gets down to the box, it's a working unit that you would buy and take home and never use. Just kidding. People do use their treadmills. But in that manufacturing environment, one of the things that I learned was how to maximize your throughput. Where can I put people in different positions in order to keep the line running, as few stoppages as possible? And you're really talking about maximizing capacity.
Yeah.
And somebody gave me a book. It's by Eli Goldratt. It's called The Goal. Came out in the 90s, a big business book. It's still around. And it's written in a novel format that is basically a manager is told that his factory is going to be shut down because he's not able to meet his quotas. And he has like a short period of time to figure out how to turn it around. And that's always stuck with me. He finds these innovative ways of taking older, slower machines and putting it back into service. And even though it's not as fast as the new ones, it still helps them its capacity that's not being used. And he puts a really skilled worker on the old machine, and he can make it run really well, whereas he can take the newer workers who are less experienced and put them on the new machines, and they can still maintain sort of that delivery. And he ultimately saves his factory. But it's built from this perspective of how are you managing your capacity? And that's one of the things that we are constantly looking at. What kind of work do we do at what lab? What type of machinery, analysis equipment, staffing level do we need for that? And how much of it are we using? And of course, we have seasonal, different times of year, different activities are happening. Winter is often slower with holidays than, say, summer and that sort of thing. But how are you balancing that capacity? And that's how you start to come to determinations like, okay, if we were to expand and we were to buy, say, an independent laboratory, what kind of work is that? Am I looking at a new business line? Say, like, there's lots of excitement around PFAS. PFAS and PFOS are hot topics right now. If you wanted to expand in that area, would you go buy a lab that specializes in PFAS, or would you buy the equipment that you would need to run that new line of business and put it in your existing location, right? And those are the kind of things that you start to look at. And then if you were to buy or acquire a lab that offers similar services to you, then how do you determine what services that you're selling? Say if you're selling silica samples and it's going to one lab, but now you have two labs that do silica. Are you going to have like Western United States shipped to one lab and Eastern United States shipped to the other? How do you do that? And then how do you not compete with yourself, right?
Yeah.
How do I not take revenue from this place that's doing really well and stick it over in this other place and then got to make it up here, because there's never an expectation that you make less money, right?
Yeah.
So maintaining your levels of revenue, and then how does that acquisition play into revenue growth for the business overall, and how do you manage those logistics? Those are always the questions that come up. And you'll see some of our competitors are very aggressively snapping up small and independent labs, and then others are more strategic in growing their single locations. That's been our focus, is maximizing our throughput. We've improved our turnaround times from a couple of years ago. We were in the 70% turnaround time on average, which means if we say it's 5-day turnaround, we were hitting that 70% of the time.
Yeah.
Right now we're in the mid 90s.
Nice.
Because we focused on our throughput. We're laser focused on just doing industrial hygiene analysis. We don't get involved in equipment or rentals or things that may distract or use up our resources in a way that doesn't deliver specifically the analysis to the customer. So that's been one of the strategic focuses from an operational and sales perspective that I've experienced at BV. But not saying one is better than the other, but right now I'm very comfortable with our improvements in turnaround time and quality, and we're growing. So that's all. When I was hired for this job, they said, what's your key metric for determining whether or not you're doing a good job? And I said, return business.
Yeah.
If people come in and they use our service and then they come back, we're doing something right. If they come in and they use us once and they don't come back, maybe we need to look at what happened and do a debrief and say, hey, could we have done better? So right now, the last 2.5 years that I've been with BV, we've had some great improvements in our operational throughput and our customer service and delivery. So I'm very happy with where we're at.
No, for sure. That's actually a great point. Because don't get me wrong, you could do millions of dollars of business with select few companies, but if it's just you do all that large work and it stops, I mean, ultimately, as years go by, you're going to run out of companies to work with. Whereas if you keep getting that repeat business, you've got almost, I don't want to say unlimited supply, obviously not, but you can constantly expand. And then, as you said, if you're maximizing output, adding additional services, then you continue to grow at a steady rate. So it's a good point. But yeah, to tailor on to what you said as well, there's not one right way of doing it. Some strategies work well for some businesses, others, for two different approaches. But it's good to hear your approach and I suppose what you're implementing. And 70% to 95%, it's a great jump. So no, congrats on that. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm very pleased with the relationship we have with our operational team. They get what our customers' needs are, and they're willing to try new things, and that makes it. We get requests, and it's like, I don't know, can we do this? And we have a conversation. We're like, well, we could. What could we try? And we'll try A, B, or C, and maybe B and C don't work, but A did. Great. And then we can share that new capacity or capability with our existing customer base, and as long as it's delivering the expectation, then it works for everybody.
No, for sure. I mean, in your role, Dan, and just, with the extensive background you have in industrial hygiene and TIC and both, I guess, taking a zoomed out approach, I mean, what direction do you actually see, the industry heading? We mentioned sort of 50% of new certified industrial hygienists being in India. I mean, where do you see that pushing the market or, the next 10 or so years of the sector or longer?
So you mentioned earlier that I have a podcast, and I do. It's called the Analyte. BV lets me interview people and talk about usually health and safety related topics, because just talking about lab stuff gets boring pretty quick. But there's a wider application to what we're doing, right? It's worker health and safety, and it's a wide net. And I had a podcast episode where I talked to a occupational hygiene leader out of Canada, and we addressed the subject of, is industrial hygiene dying, right? And we've seen some flashing indicators of, lower conference attendance, lower numbers of people getting certified, the number of college programs that offer programs in industrial hygiene that are ABET accredited, staying the same, not growing. Are they going away? It's expensive to maintain that kind of accreditation. So you start to look at it and you start to get worried. Hey, is this something to be concerned about? And in that conversation, he was very positive that we were still maintaining strong growth. And yesterday, I saw out of the UK, I saw an article that said, here's the world's predicted need in the near, say, 20 years of occupational hygienists. And then here's where we're currently at. How do we close that gap? And I thought it was very thought-provoking. It made me think about that episode. And I mentioned earlier, I'm very heartened that we're seeing in the developing world more industrial hygiene work being done. And so I think that there is a growth. I think there's a demographic shift going on. Western Europe, United States, North America are demographically shifting. The upcoming generations are smaller. So that helps explain if let's just say it's 1% of people who go to college become an industrial hygienist. That number's probably way too high. But if it's 1% of a baby boomer population, that's a bigger number than the 1% of Gen Alpha,
Yeah.
right? Same thing with doctors, right? Like, so there's the same conversation going on in the medical field. Doctors and nurses, are there enough to manage the aging, the ever growing aging population? Our workforce is generally between 18 and 60, and so the baby boomers are at the top end of that now. Gen X is moving towards the top of that. I mean, look at my beard. Um, and then we've got the Gen Zs, Gen Alphas, and millennials, and so on. So I think it's healthy to have the conversation and be aware of and keep things coming to the forefront, but also spreading the news, spreading the gospel of industrial hygiene. Just because we have a degree in industrial hygiene doesn't mean we're the only people that can practice it. We have an obligation as practitioners to help those who are HSE generalists, people in environment, people with safety backgrounds. They're likely going to be given some industrial hygiene responsibility at some point in their career, and they may or may not have the tools or the knowledge or know where to go. They can reach out to industrial hygienists. So you can always hire a consultant, but you can also learn it. It's not rocket science, as they would say. There is some science, and it's good to have some good background, take some PDCs, some professional courses or whatever, but also just be mentored. Find a hygienist and ask them questions, make friends with them. And I think that helps democratize the practice of industrial hygiene and improving it, even if there's a decrease in the number of people who are.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's probably pivotal that industrial hygienists sharing their knowledge to the next generations wherever they may be located, and also, correct me if I'm wrong, assisting on its knowledge of equipment, instrumentation, whatever it is. But I said keeping that knowledge alive. So whatever direction the industry goes to, at least that knowledge doesn't die, I suppose, with the aging population. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's keeping it alive. It's keeping it at the forefront, keeping it in front of the decision makers and the people who hold the purse strings, and making sure that they're allocating and understanding that this is a business risk. And you may have to pay for hearing tests and hearing protective equipment now, but you're offsetting the future payment of additional medical expenses and medical claims because people lost their hearing. So it's a spend now to prevent from spending later. That can be a difficult conversation sometimes. But back on the industrial hygiene and democratization, there is a factor that people can consider. You kind of think that it's binary, right? You got to hire an industrial hygienist or you got to hire an industrial hygiene consultant. There is a movement in the professional practice area that I think can help solve this problem, particularly for mid-size and smaller companies who won't have the budget to hire just an industrial hygienist. As a consultant, I found that a lot of companies don't need a full-time industrial hygienist. They need someone to come in and set up a program, and they need someone to talk to as they execute that program. And so there's this concept of what's called fractional professionals, and you see it in the marketing space, or in the financial space. You'll see like a fractional CFO.
Yeah.
And someone could then get the services of a CFO for their organization without having a full-time hire, or someone in charge of their marketing, but without having to bring them in, and they buy 20% of their time. And it allows professionals to move from that kind of antiquated bill by the hour sort of engineering focus of consulting, which is like project-based and it's short-term relationships, to move into a long-term relationship with a skilled industrial hygienist that you trust, that understands your business because you work with them over a long period of time. But they're more like a part-time employee, more like a attorney on retainer, sort of model. And I think that is going to go a long ways to bridging the gap between consulting and full-time hire.
It's actually it's a great idea, isn't it? Rather than everyone just thinking, "Oh, I really need to have someone on full time." It's like, actually, you purchase or you buy, part of their time, and they don't have to be with you 100% of the time. They don't have to be with you several days a week, whatever it equates to. But you've still got that, I suppose, industrial hygiene ticked off, and you've got the the expertise there when you need it. You've got access to it, I guess.
Access.
Yeah.
And it's also good for the industrial hygienist. When I was a consultant, I would be brought in all the time. Hey, our hygienist left. Oh, our hygienist retired. Oh, our hygienist, we got rid of our hygienist because we didn't like him anymore. Hygienists, they like to do industrial hygiene for the most part. But if you hire one full time and they're doing industrial hygiene, they're all getting everything all set up, and then there's really only 20% of their time that needs to be appropriate or applied to industrial hygiene, they're going to find other things to do. They're going to get bored. You're going to be like, hey, you're not busy. Can you do the drug and alcohol testing program? Can you, I'm like, I didn't become a hygienist to handle my coworkers' urine, like, and so then they'll be given responsibilities that they don't want to do. And then they get job dissatisfaction and then they leave. And now the company is left starting over. So it's good because this allows you to stay engaged with new companies, new opportunities. You're kind of, getting to handle the things that you're interested in, but then you're not having to be given the responsibility to, helicopter logistics or whatever thing that comes your way because, hey, we're paying this guy full time. We should keep him busy or busy. And do we, is that really going to be good for them for the long term? Are they even interested in doing that? And what's the cost of that turnover if they do leave, right? So I think this model can really strike a balance and help both sides.
No, exactly. I mean, the person can do what they love and the company is getting, what they need from them as well. So yeah, you're right. It benefits both parties. And I mean, that's actually a great topic, I suppose, idea to finish on and to leave everyone pondering and maybe even, messaging you afterwards. So, I mean, Dan, it was great picking your brains. I think one of the greatest minds I've ever heard in the industrial hygiene space. Not that I speak to many, I'll be honest. I'll leave that to you in the podcast. Just for everyone listening, is it the Analyte podcast?
The Analyte, yeah. You can find it in audio form on Apple, on Spotify. It has its own proprietary location. I'm trying to move them to YouTube. There is one, I've started to do video. There is one on YouTube that's a video. And I've kind of been slacking over the summer because of all of the travel with conferences and whatnot. But I'll start picking it up here in the fall. And it's like this. It's I try to keep it light, try to keep it interesting, but they generally go about 40 minutes. And some are better than others, but that's probably mostly on me.
Never know. You're a good host. Maybe it's all the analogies, or maybe who knows? But no, it's all good insight.
I'm super appreciative of the opportunity to be on Tales of the TIC, man. I'm so grateful you reached out, and I hope we can reach lots of people.
No, absolutely. So I said it was an absolute pleasure having you on. It was a pleasure hearing about the Analyte podcast, and I said can't wait to hear more on industrial hygiene through yourself as well. So thank you, Dan.
Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm always, if you haven't already gotten a request from me, look through your list of requests. I'm probably in there. I'm very active on there, and that's probably the easiest place to find me. And I'm very responsive if you send me a message. I'm not I don't have a big head yet, so I still respond to all my DMs.
Not quite a celebrity just yet.
Yeah, no. Although I did get an email this morning from a conference I was at yesterday. A guy said, hey, it's not often you meet a funny industrial hygienist. Let's stay in touch.
So now the ego's going. Now the head's going.
Yeah, a little bit. I can admit to a little bit of pride.
Well, it's deserved. But no, thank you anyway, Dan. As I said, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure talking to you, Anton.
Thank you.